I've never done good things. I've never done bad things. I never did anything out of the blue.
Oh, hello. My name's Nicholas Pegg, and I'm the author of a book called The Complete David Bowie. Here it is, in fact. There we are, let's get the plug over with. The perfect gift for the Bowie fan in your life, and for the person who isn't a Bowie fan in your life, it also doubles as a draft excluder and a doorstop. But I've been asked to do a little recording for the Bowie Confessional. Mark has sent me some questions, so let's have a look at them. First question is, when did you first become aware of David Bowie? Well, it was sometime in the 1970s. It might not look like it now, but I am actually just a little bit too young to have been there for that famous first Starman appearance on Top of the Pops. I think that the first Bowie song I can remember was Rebel Rebel, by which time I'd have been about 6 years old. But it wasn't really the turning point for me. The first one that really caught my imagination was when I was 9, which was Sound and Vision, beginning of 1977. That was the first single that I ever actually went out and bought with my own pocket money. I can't remember how much singles were at that point, but they weren't very much. They were about 25p or something, weren't they? Maybe a bit more than that. Anyway, it wasn't much, and I could afford it. So I played that single to death. And then a couple of years after that, I think for me the real point when I became hooked was seeing Bowie performing Boys Keep Swinging on the Kenny Everett video show specifically. The video came a little bit later, the actual video of Boys Keep Swinging, which of course was directed by the same guy, David Mallet, who did the Kenny Everett show. But that performance on there, it absolutely captivated me. There was something about him, kind of serious and silly at the same time, which is something that I've always loved about Bowie. You know, on the one hand he was singing this quite sort of directly into the camera, but on the other hand he was doing these silly jazz hands, and I just found it absolutely mesmerising. So those were my sort of points of becoming addicted to Bowie, I guess. And by the time we got to the early 80s, you know, Scary Monsters, Let's Dance, all that, I was, you know, a full-time fan. So what's the next question? What did your mates make of him is the next question. Gosh. Well, it kind of depends on when you mean, really, I suppose. When I was very young, I think like a lot of, you know, young kids in the 70s, he was almost slightly scary sort of guy. And I'm sure that some of my mates thought that as well. You know, looking at the cover of an album like Diamond Dogs, I can remember looking at that in W.H. Smith before I'd ever heard the album and thinking, wow, that's sort of spooky and weird. But by the time I became a real fan, by the time I was a teenager, we were into the age of, you know, Let's Dance and stuff like that. And it, you know, that was a great period for pop music, and a lot of my mates at school were into, you know, this was the age of Soft Cell and Frankie Goes to Hollywood and Eurythmics and all of those things. So frankly, at that point, Let's Dance era Bowie was, if anything, a little bit conventional. So I think everyone thought he was pretty cool. And by the time I became a student, later on in the 80s, that was a slightly different thing, because a lot of students were playing early Bowie. You know, the time I was a student, Hunky Dory was a big student album, and everyone had it and everyone played it, so that was really cool. Probably still is, isn't it? Is that still a student album? But at the same time, that was the period that, you know, my first year at university was the year that Never Let Me Down came out. So an album, by the way, that I'm very fond of, but it's fair to say that at the time, at that point, probably for those of us who are hardcore Bowie fans, Bowie's new material was regarded by the wider populace and one's peer group as a little bit less cool. But I think most of my mates thought he was all right, yeah. Question 3, what was your first David Bowie gig? Well now, I actually came to gigs quite late in life, so I'm probably going to horrify the hardcore now by revealing that the first Bowie gig I actually saw wasn't until 1989, Tin Machine at St George's Hall in Bradford, which is a great show. It was an incredibly hot show, I can remember that. Small venue, of course it had a bit of Bowie history. Bowie had played an early Ziggy concert there back in '72, so it was great. Of course, it was the first time I'd seen him, but it was great to see him in such a small venue. And a venue that had a bit of Ziggy history to it. It was very noisy and it was very hot. And the other thing I particularly remember about that gig, because let's make this all about me, is that I had just recently had a bit of an accident on my moped. I drove a moped as a student and I'd come off it quite badly, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks before, and ended up in hospital. Not like, you know, overnight serious, but I had to go and be sort of patched up a little bit. And I did have a rather sensitive sort of hole in my knee at the time. So I can remember jumping around in this hot, sweaty gig at St George's Hall in Bradford, and at the same time, desperately trying to make sure that no one bashed me on the knee, because that would have really hurt. But it was great. Fantastic show. And although I was a bit of a latecomer to seeing Bowie live, I think I made up for it later on, because I was lucky enough to see him many, many times after that. I'm just going to have a little sip of tea here. Nice mug, isn't it? This is made by the wonderful Sian Pattenden. If you know her, you can order these online. So thanks, Sian. Lovely mug. And the next question is, name your favourite Bowie album and tell us why you chose it. Okay. My favourite David Bowie album is Tonight, and I chose it to make you go, what? Tonight? Don't be ridiculous. No, of course it's not. I haven't got a favourite Bowie album. I don't do favourites. Honestly, I mean, if I reserve my right to change my mind before I even get to the end of this sentence, right now, at this moment, I shall plump for Hunky Dory. But I've already changed my mind. It's Low. It's Scary Monsters. It's Outside. It's Space Oddity. Honestly, I haven't got a favourite. I love them all. I really do. Sorry. Can't do it. Can't do what's your favourite album. But right now, just for this moment, let's say Hunky Dory. Next question is, did you ever meet David? No, I didn't. Sadly, I never got the opportunity to meet him. I stood very close to him in the front row of a few gigs from time to time. I actually appear in a couple of live things if you look hard enough, if you know where to look, but why would you? You'll be looking at him. But we were in contact, I'm delighted to say. David Bowie was incredibly kind and supportive about my book, which went through quite a few editions over the years. The one that's available now is actually the 7th edition, because it first came out, nearly 20 years ago now. And every time we did a new edition, we would send, a little parcel of copies off to Bowie's people in New York. And every time, without my particularly asking him or anything, he would very, very kindly write something in one of them and, sign it and send it back to me. So that was absolutely wonderful. And those, they're the only reviews of my book that have ever really mattered to me. Which actually, funnily enough, brings me to the next question, because I see that the next question is, what's your most treasured piece of Bowie memorabilia? And will you show it to us if we ask nicely? Well, as you can imagine, the books I've just been telling you about, they have to be my most treasured pieces of Bowie memorabilia, because, what an incredible privilege to have some copies of The Thing What I Wrote, signed by the man himself. And the great thing is he used to write fun little things in them. So will I show it to you if you ask nicely? Well, it just so happens I've dug one of them out and got it here. He wrote different things in different copies, but I think this is probably my favourite. So this is from a few editions ago of the book, and I'll read it out and then I'll show it to you. It says, for Nicholas, with my very best wishes, an amazing job, but of course it's all wrong. Bowie. Bless him, the old villain. There we go. You will note there is a smiley. So I think he was joking. I hope he was anyway. There we go. But yeah, that's got to be my most treasured Bowie possession. And 2 more questions left. Where were you when you heard David Bowie had passed away, and what did you do for the rest of the day? Oh gosh. Gosh, well, that was a sad day for all of us, wasn't it? I don't suppose my day was very different from that of many Bowie fans who were, very upset that day. I do remember that I'd left my mobile by the side of my bed, which I don't often do, but for some reason that night I just left it there, and about 5 o'clock in the morning, UK time, it started going, with messages. It was on silent, but it was doing that vibrating thing. And I was eventually woken up by it, because it was just going the whole time. So eventually I turned over, and of course there was a flood of messages coming through from people saying, what the hell? And of course there was that awful period, wasn't there? There was that awful sort of hour and a half or whatever it was before it was kind of properly confirmed. I think it was Duncan Jones who tweeted and said, sorry folks, but it's true. So there was that horrible period where everyone was kind of in denial and texting each other and going, oh my God, what's going on? And what did I do for the rest of the day? Well, I just, I kind of sat at home and, I posted a little tribute on Twitter. The other thing I did do for the rest of the day, although this is spectacularly irrelevant, was that I did actually spend most of the rest of that day politely declining requests to do interviews on the radio and on TV and things because of my book, I guess. And people were getting in touch via my agent or on Twitter or whatever it might be. And you know, it was very flattering to be asked. But at the time, I mean, I was, you know, very upset. I didn't see much point in me going on the radio and being upset on the radio for everyone. I mean, there was quite enough kind of that going on anyway that day, and I just thought, I don't want to do it. So I just politely declined, and there were, don't want to sound grand, but there were quite a lot of requests that day. So that was it was a pretty weird day, to be honest, but it was weird for all of us, wasn't it? But yeah, I sat at home and I clicked refresh every now and then. I didn't go down to Headon Street or do any of that sort of stuff. I just listened to a few songs. I listened to Black Star again, which of course had only just come out a few days before. Yeah, it was a sad day, wasn't it? But there was actually something, looking back on it now, extraordinarily uplifting to see how much love there was, you know, how much it obviously meant to so many people. And I think that's the thing that, you know, one now remembers more than anything else, is this sort of extraordinary tidal wave of love and admiration and respect for David Bowie. And it wasn't one of those sort of concocted things that the media occasionally make up, and we all have to, you know, the media had to run to keep up with the response rather than the other way around. And it was kind of rather wonderful, wasn't it? And the last question. Tell us your favourite Bowie story. Oh my goodness, where do you start? There's so many stories about Bowie, aren't there? There's lots of lovely stories about how kind he was and how generous he was, and the way he, you know, looked after children and the work he did for charity and all that sort of stuff. Because he was, you know, a frankly a rather wonderful person. But there's also all sorts of funny stories, aren't there? Because he had such a wonderful sense of humour and got up to such funny stuff. I'm sure you've all heard the one about when he was shooting the Ashes to Ashes video and a guy got in the way. I don't think I can repeat that story because it relies quite heavily on a swear word. But that's a great story. Look that one up on the internet. Oh, I'm just trying to think. I mean, look, there's so many. I haven't, again, and favourite. I already said with albums, I haven't got a favourite. I'll tell you one that I do love, though, talking about Black Star. There's a wonderful story because in the midst of recording this dark, doomy, majestic final album, Bowie's sense of humour was still there the whole time, because some other members of the band, I think it was Ben Monder, the guitarist on that album, tells this story that in the middle of the sessions one day, while they were in the middle of recording whatever it was, Bowie suddenly said, guys, come and look at this. And he was on the internet and he'd found that YouTube video, which I'm sure you may have seen, that someone did of the Dancing in the Street video, you know, Bowie and Mick Jagger, and they'd got rid of the sound and just put on silly burps and pants and all their sort of footsteps and all that, and Bowie thought it was hilarious. So he halted proceedings on the recording of his final masterpiece, Black Star, so that everyone could have a look at that. I think that's a fantastic story. I think that sums up an awful lot about him, actually. There we go. So that'll be my favourite story for today, but as soon as we switch this off, I'll think of another one. Well, those are the 8 questions, so that's my Bowie confessional. I've been Nicholas Pegg. Cheers.